Om Shiva
Samaramam
Shankaracharya
Shankaracharya
Madhyamam
Madhyamam
Asmadacharya
Vande Guru
Guru
Paramparam
Paramparam Saraswati
Vande Kamarupini Shishyami Bhavatu Me Sada
Om
Bhavatu Om Bhunaktu Savityam Bhavavai Yasmitavadi Sambhavidavai Om Shanti Shanti Shanti
Vasudev Om Namah Shivaya.
Om Namah Shivaya.
But it's been a long gap, and I hope you remember. You've not forgotten what we were talking about. So we'll have a quick revision, then we'll start. Okay, so what were we talking about?
Cool.
Sadhana Chatushtaya.
Sadhana Chatushtaya. What is Sadhana Chatushtaya?
It's the fourfold eligibility qualification for Jnanam.
Yes, the fourfold eligibility criteria for Jnanam. And what are they?
Viveka, Vairagya, Shadpati, Mumukshutva.
Okay. What is Vivekaha?
Nitya, Anitya, Vastu, Viveka.
Nitya, Anitya, Vastu, Vivekaha means understanding
The permanent and impermanent.
Understanding the difference between the permanent and the impermanent. Having clarity on what is permanent and what is not permanent. Then what is Viragaha?
Iha Swarga Bhogeshu Ichha Rahityam.
Okay, and meaning?
Absence of having any longing or desire for pleasurable experiences here and now and in the next life.
Yes. And is it an absence of desiring sense objects, or is it something else? Do we modify it little?
Yes, it's freedom from addiction.
Freedom from addiction, not freedom from the object itself. Okay, freedom from craving the object, freedom from being an emotional slave to objects of the world. Then, Shamadhi Shat Sampatti. How many are there?
Six.
What are they?
Shama, Dhamma, Parama, Titikla, Shraddha, Tama.
Yes. And how many have we finished?
We were on Titiksha. We just started.
Yeah, we just started Titiksha, which is the fourth one. What is Shama?
It's Manonigraha.
Requirement.
Manonigraha. Management of the mind or thought discipline. Then what is Dhamma?
It's Indriya Nigraha.
Indriya Nigraha.
Control of the
Management
senses.
of the sense organs. Managing the sense organs in an intelligent way. Not suppression, but intelligent redirection. Then what's the third one?
Uparama.
And what is Uparamaha?
Maintaining the calmness of calm mind.
Maintaining the calm mind.
Calmness.
What was the definition given by the author?
Swadharma
Swadharma
Anushthanam.
Nishtha.
Swadharma Anushthanam
Anushthanam eva.
means being established in Swadharma. What is Swadharma?
And the Nitya and Naimitya karma. As
Nitya and
duty.
Naimitya karma.
Naimitya
Daily
karma.
duties that one has to do, performing them, that is Nitya Karma, and being established in this and reducing the other three, which is Kamya Karma, Nishiddha Karma, and the Prayashchitta Karma,
Prayashchitta
reducing
karma.
or even trying to eliminate the other three. This is called as Uparamaha. And through performing this Nitya Karma, it increases Uparamaha. Why? Because it helps to maintain the calmness of the mind. It reduces the FIR levels. Okay. So last time we saw this Uparamaha and we saw the types of activities. And we had just started Titiksha. And we can read this now. Titiksha ka
Titiksha
Koshna sukha dukkadi sahishnutvam.
Sitoshna Sukha
Okay. Now we will see this in detail and I will mute all of you. And later you can ask questions when we finish this topic. Okay. So, Titiksha, tolerance, forbearance, patience, resilience. Okay, any number of words you can use for this. And it is at the physical as well as mental level. That is why we have Shita Ushna, heat and cold. Heat and cold is at the physical level. Sukha Dukha is pain and pleasure, which is at the mind level. So whenever we look at life, we know that life is not always a pleasant journey. We want it to be a pleasant journey, but it doesn't always happen, right? And if you look at the lives of some of the stories of Rama and Krishna, you will see they also did not have very ideal lives. What happened to Rama? His wife was kidnapped and then he had to go fight with Ravana and kill him and bring his wife back. And so even his life was not perfect. And before that, of course, his father threw him out of the palace, sent him away into exile. So he was born a prince, but now he's living in a forest with just his wife and his brother. No amenities, no luxuries. So it is, of course, not an idealistic life. And of course, there's Krishna's life with, he was killing demons, he was fighting wars, and of course, he was a king in his clan. So a lot of administrative work will be there, I'm sure. So it is not at all a perfect life. So nobody has ever had a perfect life. It is an ideal, unrealistic situation, right? To expect a perfect life. So all the time we all have problems and we have to face these problems also. Now, generally, there are three ways in which people handle problems or painful, difficult situations. The first thing that people do is they try to find a solution or a remedy for this painful situation. And how do you find a solution? By trying to change the external environment. If there is some problem, we try to fix the world so that it doesn't trouble us. For example, if it becomes very hot, then we install an AC, an air conditioner, right? So like this, we do a lot of things where we change the outside world so that the problem is reduced. Now, this works, but however, sometimes it is not feasible to do this, right? It might be too expensive in terms of money, in terms of effort, in terms of time. So in many ways, the solution, even if it is there, may not be feasible to do. And sometimes, even if we do the solution, that solution creates a new problem, right? So many times we fix something, but that fixing has created some other new problem. So SPG gives a nice example. He says, you're carrying a heavy bag on your right shoulder and you're walking. And after a while, your right shoulder starts to hurt. So what do? You find a solution and you shift from right to left shoulder and you keep going. After some time, now the left shoulder is hurting. So you have found a solution which has created a new problem, right? So sometimes this also happens. Another way in which we handle difficult situation is to tolerate the pain. Okay, tolerate is in quotes because it is not really tolerating. What it is actually suppressing. You may have heard the phrase suffer in silence. So that suffer in silence is this quote unquote tolerate. Okay, so it is not really a tolerance, it is just denying yourself that, or pulling yourself that I am tolerating, but actually inside you are suffering. And what happens when you do this? There is an eventual explosion in the form of anger, in the form of violence, in the form of an outburst. Something may happen. And it is a very destructive event when that happens, right? So, this is one way which is not a very efficient and definitely not a very sustainable way of trying to handle situations. Then there is a third way, which is another kind of suppression, but here there is no explosion. You keep on bottling it up inside. The suffering in silence goes on indefinitely, no explosion for it. And what happens? It implodes, meaning it explodes inside, and that causes problems internally. So it can be in the form of psychosomatic diseases. It can be in the form of stress in the mind. It can be in the form of a nervous breakdown or in the form of blood pressure. So many problems that people get. Why? Because they have suppressed it so much and now the body has started reacting. It takes a toll on the body and mind. It is a stressful situation. It is friction in the mind. Okay, so all of these three are not the best solutions, right? Because they don't work long term and the problem continues to be there, right? So there is a fourth way to handle painful situations, and that is titiksha, endurance or tolerance. Now, all of us have a threshold for tolerating pain, right? There is some capacity for us to handle the pain. And when it is within that level, we call it a situation. Only when it goes beyond that level, we call it pain. Within the level, situation, beyond the level, pain. So that level that everybody has, and we all know that everyone has different levels, right? So some people, you find them to be very tolerant towards painful or difficult situations, whereas some people are so sensitive, small thing happens and they lose it, right? So we all know everyone has a level. Now this level can be changed. You can elevate this level. And this elevating this level is called titiksha. Now, when you elevate that level, whatever comes within that level, that is just a situation that you can easily handle because it is within your capacity. Whatever comes beyond that situation, only that becomes pain. So when you change the level, you have now changed the number of painful situations and you have converted them into just situations. Right? So this is titiksha, changing that very threshold of pain. Now, a question comes, how to do this, right? So there is a story that I heard recently. It's a Greek mythology story about somebody called Milo. Now, I don't know the full story. I don't even know if it is Milo or Milo. So just I'll tell you the important part of the story for us. So there was this person called Milo, and he wanted to become a bodybuilder or a wrestler, and participate in the Olympic sports or something and win. So he wanted to become an athlete. So he had to start training for it. Now it so happened that just in his house, a calf was born, a baby cow was just born. So he decided that every day I will carry this baby cow and walk some distance or run some distance or climb a mountain and come back and leave it. And so he decided to do this every day. Now what happens? Every day the cow grows a little bit, right? And with that, his strength also started growing little bit, little by little, little by little. And it took some time, a couple of years or whatever, however long it takes for a cow to grow up. And one day he was able to carry the bull, the big bull, and climb that mountain and come back. And now he was very strong and he was able to participate and win in those events. So this is a story. So what do we learn? That we start small and day by day we build up on it, right? So it applies to all of us also. So those of you who have gone to the gym to do weightlifting or something, on day one, do you go and pick up the 30 kg dumbbells? No, you pick up the 2 kg dumbbells, right? And you work with that for a few days. Then you pick up the 5 kg dumbbells and work with that for a few more days. Then 10, then 20, then you build up slowly to 30. On day one, if you go and try to pick up the 30 kg dumbbell, it's going to be a problem. The body will not cooperate. So what you have done is slowly, you have changed the capacity of your body, right? You have built the strength and resilience of your body in a very slow, systematic, sustainable way. And now one day, even the 30 kg dumbbell is not a challenge for you. That is also just another thing that you can pick up, right? So this is the same way that we work on titiksha. Little by little, we build on it. And in fact, this is the same concept that we use for vaccines also. So what do they do in vaccines? They take a weakened form of the virus, they inject it into the body. And if the big virus comes, the body does not have the capacity to fight it. But if you give a weakened virus, then the body can fight it. And in that process, the body has become stronger. Now, next time when the big virus comes, the body can fight it, right? So this is how we build. And now when we talk about titiksha, it has to be at a mental as well as physical level. Both have to be there. We have to build mental as well as physical tolerance. Why? Because if you just build physical strength, physical resilience, then what about the mind? Some small upset for the mind and you cannot handle. So it is not sufficient to build only physical. And suppose you build only mental tolerance. The bodily problems still have the potential to disturb you, right? The bodily problems may still have the potential to disturb that mental stability. And that is why that is also incomplete. And so we have to build both. We have to take care of the strength and health of the body as well as the resilience of the mind. So this is titiksha. Now, how to build? How to build this pain tolerance? So the answer is very simple. The only way that you can build enduring the pain is by enduring the pain. It's like asking, how do I learn swimming? Only by swimming you can learn swimming. If a baby asks you, how do I learn walking? Only by walking he will learn walking, right? There is no shortcut. We have to face it head on. What we can do, we can have controlled situations where we can face it in a systematic manner. This is one way that we can try. There's no escaping from that situation. We have to face it head on and fearlessly, and then the titiksha builds. Now this facing it head on is called as tapas. In tapas, you are voluntarily putting yourself into a uncomfortable or painful situation in order to build your endurance levels. And that situation that you're putting yourself, it may be an artificially constructed situation or it may be some life situation. But converting a painful situation into tapas, using it as an opportunity to build my endurance, that is tapas. Okay. So this is about building the titiksha. So we do tapas. Now tapas can be anything. It can be any small activity that you can do at home also. There is no need to go stand in the Himalayas on one leg in Vrikshasana and call that as tapas. We can do tapas at home also. Simply if you take up fasting, for example, that is also tapas. Anywhere or any situation where you have voluntarily put yourself into a somewhat uncomfortable situation, stepping out of the comfort zone, that is tapas. But there are three conditions for tapas. Three conditions for it to be called tapas. The first condition is apratikara purvakam. That means you have to complete this task without breaking it or without giving up halfway. So suppose you take fasting. Suppose you've decided to do fasting for 3 days or some number of days. In between, you don't say, I will have an apple today, just an apple. No. Okay, so that is apratikara purvakam. You complete it without breaking it, without giving up, without losing that, task that you're holding on to. Second condition is chinta rahitam, without dwelling on the difficulties and pains of this task that you have taken. If all the time you're thinking, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, there's no benefit. It is not tapas. So without obsessing about the difficulties of the task. And the last one is vilapa rahitam, without lamenting or without complaining verbally. If you go around calling everybody and telling them, oh, I've gone without food, oh, it is so difficult, oh, I'm so hungry all the time. No, that also is not tapas. So you have taken on this task and you have decided to face it head on. And now you have to do it strongly without mentally or verbally complaining about it or thinking of how difficult it is, and just face it head on. And of course, completing till the end without breaking it in between. This is tapas. These are the conditions for tapas. Now, a lot of people have asked Raviji that should I take up sannyasa or should I'm in grihastha, is spirituality okay for me? Is spirituality only for sannyasis? Should I do something? Should I go live in an ashram? Many people have asked Raviji this question, that should I go to an ashram and should I just take up sannyas, leave all family and everyone? And actually, the greatest tapas is grihastha ashrama. Okay, the greatest tapas is to live with family, with your spouse, learn to handle the spouse, the in-laws, the children, everybody, and live in this world. And it will teach you a lot. It is one of the greatest lessons in Titiksha. And we have to use the grihastha ashram accordingly to build our sadhana chatushtayam. And we have made the wrong conclusion that sannyasa ashrama is a very idealistic or very pleasant life. It is not. Even for sannyasis, they also require a lot of tapas. They don't have a choice about many things, because they don't have resources or they don't have their own belongings, right? So they have to accept whatever comes, whatever food comes, whatever the place, whatever the weather, whatever it is, they have to accept without, trying to get out of it. And that also requires titiksha. And so titiksha is actually a very, very important quality. And we have to start young. In fact, the more sensitive you are, the more titiksha you should develop, because it is needed. Otherwise, all the time you will be hurt by the world. Okay, so this is about titiksha, endurance. So now we can stop for questions. If you have anything to ask, you can unmute and ask.
Vedaji, so for example, When it comes to our bringing a change in our lifestyle, when it comes to, like, for example, tapas, I'll tell you about myself. I used to eat 5 times a day because I used to be a bodybuilder before. Now, considering yoga as my path, I started fasting on and off. But then my family, and especially my wife, she always looks at me and she's telling me, "You want to eat, right? You want to eat, right?" So even if I'm trying to, suppress that thought, or let's say trying to endure that, no, I don't have to, and I'm doing japa within, she'll always look at me, and that's the time I get more a little irritated on the fact that let me walk the path without you telling, reminding me. And that's when all the three of them, they're standing in front of my face. Is there a better way of handling this?
Obviously, you cannot leave them for just this much, but you can sit down with them and make them understand, I think, that you're trying to do something serious and this is very meaningful to you, and they should not be disturbing you like this, and that hurts you. You should try and, in a calm way, discuss this with them, that this is not conducive for me and I'm not liking it. So first thing, make them understand. And many people are reasonable. Usually they understand and they would stop in such a, situation. Otherwise, you can take some different steps. Like if they really are not cooperating, then you take different steps. If you're doing a fast or something, then you just maybe stay away from them for that day or something. Once they understand how serious you are about it, most people stop bothering you. So you have to not react emotionally. If you, the whole fun of poking you is in that emotional reaction that you give. If you stop giving that emotional reaction, they will stop bothering you.
Yeah, because it makes complete sense. Because right now I'm in Qatar, and here during Ramadan, a lot of people fast. But the rules is during fasting, all the restaurants are closed, everything is closed. So they sleep during the day. So we kind of not make fun, or we don't really comment on it, but it's like, if you're fasting, how will you sleep? And then,
Yeah.
it's fasting, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
thank
So it's because they take their fasting so seriously. So I think when I had gone to Dubai once, and we had gone during the Ramzan time, and we were not allowed to eat outside in public spaces out of respect for the country, because the whole country is fasting. So you are not allowed to eat. You can eat, but go somewhere silently, quietly, somewhere out of sight, and then you eat if you want. But you're not supposed to poke them. So that is because the whole country takes it so seriously. They are very serious about this fasting that they do. So if you take it seriously, nobody will bother you. So you have to become very strong about it.
Thank you so much, Vinay.
Vedaji, I can add one more thing.
Yeah.
When you contemplate on others' suffering, which is greater, your own suffering looks minimal and you are able to bear with it better.
Yes. There's always people who suffer more and who suffer less also. We just have to focus on ourselves, what we want to do. Okay.
Umida ji, can I say something?
Yeah.
This statement you made about Grihastha also requiring a lot of titiksha and endurance, it resonated a lot with me, because most people make it seem as if sannyasa is a bigger thing and a more valuable thing. But I do agree with you that Grihastha also needs a lot of endurance, titiksha, patience, everything that is required to run the daily life.
Yes.
Thank you.
We don't have to put down grihastha. A lot of spiritual paths put down grihastha, but it is not. Actually, grihastha is more challenging, and more of a. It teaches you more spiritual lessons than sannyasashrama can teach you. And you can be a sannyasi. You don't need the orange robes. It is all state of mind. Okay.
Vedaji, one last question.
Yeah.
Is it that the people, sometimes we see the villagers or simple people or those who do menial tasks, their tolerance is like they take criticism, and I mean, people look down upon them or give them mental torture and they bear it, and physically also they are stronger. Is it because they are in that situation I mean, they're not of their choice and they've become like that condition from birth? or like city people are more educated or whatever, but their tolerance is less physically as well as mentally. They react strongly and opinionated about everything. So is it because of the environment, or?
It's possible because their lives are harsher. They have to face more difficult things, right? They have to struggle even just for basics, food and shelter. So obviously that toughens them up a bit. Whereas in city, most people live in a lot of comfort. The more comfort and more luxury you have, the more sensitive and weaker you actually become. But that being said, we cannot really say that, oh, they have so much titiksha, because we don't know the state of mind. It is finally about the mind, because as I explained, it could be suppression also, or it could be the, just bottling it up inside. We don't know what they are doing inside. What we see outside, physically, yes, they are stronger, agreed, but mentally, we don't know. They might be stronger, but they might just be bottling it inside. The only person that we will ever truly know is our own self. That is, if you are honest with yourself totally.
One more thing, Mehtaji. When you meditate and when you realize that you are not restricted to the body or the mind, and when you progress towards the realization that you are in the Surya state, to realize that you are the Brahman, then the body pain vanishes actually.
Yes, but that is a slightly different thing. There, the joy of Atma Ananda is so much greater that this feels like a small pinprick. Whatever happens to the body is like a small pinprick.
That is perhaps the easiest way to overcome.
It is the ultimate way to overcome. Easiest, I don't know. We're all here trying to do that only, right? It is the final answer, you can say. Okay, so this was Titiksha, and now we can move on to Shraddha. You can read this. Shraddha ki drushi
Shraddha
कीदृशी
कीदृशी
Guru Vedanta
गुरुवेदान्त
Vakyadishu
वाक्यादिषु
Vishwasa Shraddha.
विश्वासः श्रद्धा.
Okay, so we'll see Shraddha now, and I will just mute everybody. Okay. So the word Shraddha means faith, trust. Now, unfortunately, in today's world, a lot of people have an allergy to the word faith. They think that faith means you have to surrender your free will, or faith means that you just blindly follow what somebody else is saying, and or there's some blind belief. You don't think, you just do what they are saying. So this kind of a wrong notion has come about with the word faith. But here in Vedanta, we are not talking about blind faith. Okay, we are talking about healthy faith. One second. It is not blind faith. It is not no faith also. It is healthy faith. So what is healthy faith? Faith that is accompanied with the intellect is called healthy faith. Faith that is backed up, that is vetted by the intellect, is called healthy faith. Faith where you don't put your intellect and your thinking process to sleep. Faith where you don't have to surrender your free will to anybody else. Faith where you don't, or faith where you have a questioning attitude, a curious attitude. It seems a contradiction, no? That how can you have faith and a questioning attitude? But here, what we mean is you have faith on the Vedas, on the scriptures. And when Shastra tells you something, when Shastra explains something to you, you can question it, but not with doubt, not trying to undermine Shastra, not trying to disprove the authenticity of Shastra. You don't question with that attitude. You question with the attitude that I have not understood. Shastra is telling and Shastra is correct, but I have not understood. And because I want to understand, I am asking a question. So this is the difference. This kind of a questioning or a curious attitude that I want to understand and I want to know. So having total faith on the scriptures, on Shastra, that is Shraddha. Now, many times it will happen that in Shastra, you will find certain contradictions or you will find certain statements that don't make sense to you. And at that time, you don't say that Shastra is wrong, Shastra is incorrect, or Shastra is silly, it doesn't make sense. No, what you say is, I have not understood. There is a way to explain this, and I have not understood. So it is faith pending understanding. So you may not have understood right now, but you don't doubt the validity of Vedas. That is faith. And of course, every statement is passed through the intellect. It has to be intellectually acceptable to you. Then only you keep it. So I'll give you an example. Okay, so I will unmute you and we will have a small discussion on this. So, what is the color of this pen that I'm holding?
Light green.
Green. Green. Okay. Now, are you sure that it is green?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you have any doubt that this is green?
No.
No doubt. Think about your answer, okay? Don't just answer because I'm asking. Think about it. Do you have any doubt that this is green?
There's a little white also on top.
Okay, we'll forget the white part. Just focus on the green part. Any doubt that this is a green pen?
No.
No.
No. Okay. How do you know that this is green?
By what we
Eyes.
see, because of the eyes.
My eyes.
And how we understand
Because
it.
of your eyes, you are able to see that it is green. Okay. Now, suppose, imagine there is a person sitting next to me, and let us say this person is blind. And now he tells you, I want proof that this is a green pen. So the blind man says, I want proof that this is a green pen. Now go ahead and explain to him how this is a green pen, or prove to him this is a green pen.
Impossible.
Think about it. Take a moment. Think. Can you prove in any way?
With the
Impossible.
help of some examples.
Hello,
Okay, let
ma'am.
us say this man has
we
never
can-
seen colors in his life. Okay.
We can do operation of his eyes and give him that drushti.
So what you're saying is, let us somehow give him eyes, and then he will only be able to see by himself, right? Is that what you're saying?
It is subjective understanding. It's
Yes,
impossible.
yes.
So you're saying, let us give him eyes, then he can see that this is a green pen. Okay. Is there any other way? Okay, fine. This is one way.
Yes.
We'll accept this.
One
Any
more.
other way?
One more, Meeraji. You not only give him eyes so he can see, but after giving eyes, he has to be able to differentiate between different colors. So he needs to have his knowledge that this is green, this is yellow, this is red. The child, for example, knows, he can see. A 1-year-old child or 1.5, but does not recognize colors. He cannot know that this is green or some other color.
Forget about the label. Okay. Green, for this color, there is a label and we call that label as green. Okay. But we need some way to identify it. No, so we call it green.
Yes.
Forget about the nomenclature and naming and labeling and all. But how do you prove to this man? Let us say green is a universally accepted color, right? There is no other way to. 1 minute. If you have background noise, please stay on mute. Okay, otherwise it will disturb and people can't hear. Only if you have a very silent background, then please unmute. Okay, so this is green, right? And it is a universally accepted fact that this color is green. It is very fundamental. If somebody asks you what is the proof that this is green? There's actually no way to explain, right? So all of you just tried and you thought about it for a moment, and there's no way to explain to the blind man that this is a green pen, or to prove to the blind man this is a green pen. How can you prove? He doesn't have eyes to see. What proof can you offer him?
Vedaji, I think the blind man should have faith on you.
No, then anyone can come and tell him this is any color. No, he will have to simply accept. But what is the final proof? Him seeing is the proof. When you see, that seeing itself is the proof that this is a green pen. No further proof is required. And no further proof is possible also. Okay. And this is the relationship between the eyes and color. Eyes reveal color to you. For those who don't have eyes, there is no other way for them to know color, right? Can the ears tell them about color? It can only tell them a sound, and that sound is green, but there is no matching color. Green, the word green is a sound. The color green is here, which you see with your eyes. Okay, these are very fundamental things. Even physics cannot really go ahead and prove or try to put across these points, you know. And for such a fundamental sense object, you need an equally fundamental sense organ, which is your eyes. And now when your eyes tell you that this pen is green in color, you take it without doubt. Because your eyes are telling you, and you have that much faith on your eyes that this is a green pen. And there's no way to prove, okay? To anybody, even to yourself, there is no way to prove that this is green. The seeing itself is the proof. Now, suppose I come and tell you, this is a red pen. What are you going to tell me?
No way.
No, it isn't.
No.
You're
going to
joking.
tell me, no, I can see that this is a green pen. You are very clear and you're very confident. If suppose I go on insisting, as a teacher, I go on insisting, no, this is red, no, this is red. What will you do? You'll stop coming to my class from the next day onwards, right? Because it is not intellectually satisfying to you, because you are not able to accept, because your eyes are telling you this is green and you have faith on the eyes. And this is the relationship between eyes and color. There is no other way to know color. And because you know this, somewhere deep inside, you know this. And that is why you have so much faith on the eyes. What the eyes tell, you accept. And that is why eyes are pramanam. Pramanam, you may have heard the word before. Pramanam is a source of knowledge. A source of knowledge. So this knowledge that comes from the eyes is indisputed. It is beyond proof. And there is no other way to get this knowledge. Right? And when these conditions are satisfied, that is called as pramanam. So a source of knowledge must be indisputed, beyond proof, and there can be no other way to get that knowledge. Just like the eyes and color. Now, when it comes to Shastra, we use the same relationship. Shastra and Atma Jnanam have the same relationship as eyes and color. Shastra is the only way to know about Atma. There is no other way to understand or to know about Atma. This is very important to remember. Okay? Jnanat eva kaivalyam. This knowledge is the only way to moksha, and this knowledge is only revealed through Upanishads or through the Vedas, we can say. Okay? And this is important. And this faith we need to have on scripture. The way I have faith on my eyes to tell me color, the same or even greater faith I have to have on Veda to when it comes to Atma Jnanam. When it comes to the subject of Atma, I have to have the faith that Veda is a pramanam. There is no other way for me to know. So this is the understanding. This is Shraddha. Okay, so this is a very important point. And I'll tell you an interesting statement made by Swami Dayananda. So he said, Upanishad is not that which reveals Atmagnanam. Anything that reveals Atmagnanam is Upanishad. Okay, so Upanishad is not those books that reveal Atmagnanam. Anything in the world that reveals Atmagnanam is Upanishad, is Veda, is Pramanam. And that source is Shastra, what we call. So this you have to understand. And now coming to the statement. Guru Vedanta Vakyadishu Vishwasaha Shraddha. Vishwasaha. The word means faith or trust. Trust on what? Guru and Vedanta Vakya. They have mentioned Guru and Vedanta Vakya. Vedanta Vakya means words or teachings of the scripture. And they go hand in hand. Okay? That is why both are mentioned. Guru is not separate from Shastra. Shastra is not separate from Guru. Why? Because you are not supposed to do independent self-reading of Shastra. You need a teacher to explain. And that teacher should not be telling his personal opinions of the subject. He should be telling what Shastra says. Okay, so that is why they go hand in hand. Guru and Veda. They go hand in hand. And having faith on this, we'll call this a Shastra, having faith on this Shastra, that this Shastra is a Pramanam. This Pramanam is the only way for me for Atma Jnanam. That is called as Shraddha. Having that faith is Shraddha. The way you have faith that eyes are the only way for me to know color. There is no other way that I will ever be able to know color. Right? The ears cannot help me. The mouth cannot help me. If somebody comes and tells me this is green, but I cannot see, then green is not a meaningful concept to me. It is just a sound. It is just a word. So the only way to know color is for me to have eyes. So that eyes becomes a pramanam. In the same way, the only way to know about Atmagnanam is through Shastra. There is no other way. Your sense organs will not reveal Atma. Deep meditation is not going to reveal Atma. Nothing else on the planet is going to reveal Atma. Only Shastra. Only the teacher Shastra. Okay? So this is the faith we have. And if I don't understand something in Shastra, if there is some contradiction, sometimes it happens, Shastra says one thing here and then totally opposite thing somewhere else. It doesn't mean that Shastra is wrong or incorrect. What it means is, I have not figured out the correct way to understand this. And for that, you need a teacher. You will need to ask. Here it says this, here it says that. How do I resolve this? And the teacher will explain and resolve the issue. So having that faith that Shastra is correct, Shastra is Pramanam, and I just need to work on my understanding. That is Shraddha. Now we can stop for questions.
Om Medaji.
Yeah.
Medaji, your Shraddha, you have mentioned that you have a pramana. So there are some ritual which does not have praman, but we are following it since years. When we ask our elders, what is the proof that this is going to be give the result of this and that, they said we never asked our elders. So it's better you follow or you just leave it. So
there are certain rituals or certain procedures described in the Vedas, in the Karma Kanda, the Purva portion of the Vedas. There are certain procedures described, and even the results of those procedures are also given in the Phalam section. They will describe that if you do this, you will get this. And sometimes it is not described, then you just generically take it as Punyam. But this concept of Punyam, Papam, result, that also has come from Vedas. Why? Because there is no other way for us to know, right? Is there any other way for you to verify that Punyam happens or Papam happens or that there is a Swarga? There's no other way. So what Veda says, we accept. Because we don't have any way to prove it. At the same time, we don't have a way to disprove it. remember that absence of proof is not equal to proof of absence. Okay, this is important. Absence of proof is not proof of absence. Just because there is no way to prove it doesn't mean it has been disproved. There is no way to disprove it also. So that is why we accept. And so when it comes to certain rituals, many of them have been distorted these days. So when you get it from an authentic source, from a correct place, you can accept it. If it has been just handed down and you don't know, and many times parents also don't know, then you can see. But in any case, whatever activity, the law of karma says, whatever action you do with, depending on the intention, it will have result. So if you are doing worship of the Lord with the attitude of worship, then it will definitely have punyam and you can continue to do. But if you want particular things, then you have to go to the correct source and find the correct way of doing it and do it in that way only. But
Thank
as
you,
Vedanta students, we want Chitta Shuddhi. So any activity can be converted into karma yoga through the correct attitude. So it doesn't matter if it is procedurally incorrect or you don't know where it has come from. Those are forgiven when it comes to karma yoga. When it comes to karma kanda, that is the purva portion, if it's a pure proper Vedantic ritual and you want the proper result of that, then you have to do it exactly the way it is told.
Thank you, Medhaji.
Medhaji, in spite of one's Shraddha being deep, if the mental obscurity is like a colored vision, a green may look like a yellow if there's a blue glass one, like that. Mental obscurity can make one miss the truth,
Yes. And this bias is called as ragadvesha. And as Vedanta students, we are working to remove the bias of ragadvesha, the grip of attachment, the grip of likes and dislikes. Those are the things that color our vision. And when you remove that, then you will have perfect vision. So Chitta Shuddhi is the effort to remove that colored vision.
Medhaji, I have a quick question, actually two of them. The first one, lately I have been following Shiva very like deeply within myself with this year. So I don't know, I am also hesitant to asking you this question, but if I look as Atma as nothing but Shiva, if I truly believe that everything is, because that's how I can have more faith naturally right now. Is it a right way?
When you say Shiva, what do you mean?
I am not considering the body. I'm not looking at the Upadhi Shiva. I look at it, the consciousness.
Then it is fine. The name doesn't matter.
And the second question is, just curiosity, like here, is moksha a physical experience or is it a change of mindset by removing the ignorance of ego?
Moksha is understanding. The simplest way to put it. There may not be any physical change. Your body, your mind, life, the planet, everything will continue as it is. But now you have understood that you are not Anatma. You are Atma. That firm, deep understanding, that is moksha.
Thank you so much.
Medhaji.
Yeah.
I have two questions. The first one is, could you please repeat the phrase you used to say that Jnanam is the only thing that brings moksha? It was something that's finishing Kaivalyam.
Jnanat eva Kaivalyam.
Okay, thank you so much.
Jnanam is the only way for moksha.
Yeah. And Kaivalyam is not mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, but is mentioned in the
Kaivalya is same as moksha.
This phrase is taken from the Patanjali Yoga Sutra?
It's a fairly common word. Patanjali has used it. And in Patanjali's case also, Kaivalya means moksha. But when it comes to Patanjali Yoga Sutras, there are two ways to interpret it. One is a Dvaita way, which we don't follow. And the other is the Advaita way. And the Advaitic interpretation, Kaivalya is moksha. Actually, in the Dvaitic also, Kaivalya is moksha. But when it comes to Patanjali, I have to say this because it's a dicey subject, because the most common and prevalent interpretation available today is the Dvaita, which does not sit in very well with our Advaitic understanding. And that is why a lot of students get confused when they try to study. And that is why if you want to study Yoga Sutras, you have to find a teacher who can explain to you in Advaita, interpret in Advaita. Otherwise, it will cause confusion. There are two different schools of understanding.
Thank you. And the second question is, I forgot, but I will ask if I remember later. Sorry.
You ask later when you remember it. Right. Anything else?
Oh, I remember the question, Medaji.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So when we were talking about karma and all these teachings comes from the Vedas, and the Vedas are divided in some sections, and we know the last section known also as Upanishads, and Vedanta comes from that part. The karma knowledge about karma phalam, karma, nishkama karma, and all these kind of things, they come from which parts of the Vedas?
It is there in both. So the law of karma and everything, we do discuss in Vedanta and we do talk about it, right? So it is there in Upanishads also, but the corresponding, okay, this ritual gives you this result. That kind of specific knowledge is there in the Karma Kanda portion.
Medaji, I have a nagging doubt. Buddha was affirming anatma and not accepting the authority of the Vedas, yet he seems to have got moksha. How come?
Buddha, well, we don't know actually. I personally, I have some theories, because if we accept that Buddha is a jnani and he was a moksha purusha, then definitely he had to have atmajnanam. Now, why he chose not to teach that to his people out of, many times, many teachers, they see the situation and they say, okay, these people are not ready. Let me give them something else to work with to elevate them. So that might have been one. These are just my theories, okay? I don't know. So one approach is that. Another is maybe his disciples later distorted certain things, because it's been a very long time. So we don't know how authentic whatever has reached us is. So it's possible that some of his later people have distorted. Even within Buddhism, they have different sections, now. So we don't know. But if you accept that Buddha is a jnani, which is a generally, accepted thing, then we have to also accept from the Vedanta point of view that he had Atmajnanam.
No, I would put it this way. He successfully outlined a procedure of eliminating the mental obscurities by deep contemplation,
yes,
insightful contemplations, and due to which a lot of Zen masters are still happening all over the world. And
yes,
they're nothing less than Ramana Maharshi, for example. They're same level. So what I think, whether you approach infinity from plus side or minus side, you end up at the same point.
What is plus side or minus side in this?
Plus infinity and minus infinity, ultimately end point is the same. Like you may say Atma or you may say Anatma. It doesn't predetermine any, define any end point. You just do it and you reach the end point. That's his way. Here, Vedas.
What is the end point for Buddhism?
End point is moksha. That is nirvana. Nirvana is moksha.
What do they call it? What have they defined nirvana?
Nirvana.
No. Nirvana is the word. What is the definition of nirvana?
A definition is shunyata. Ultimately,
what is shunyata? You're just replacing words with other words.
No.
I'm asking for an
What it
explanation.
means is colorless, waterless, nirmalyata.
And what is that? What do they say about
that? That is what you are saying, a non-dual. Probably, there's a theory saying that Advaita Vedanta took the doctrine of Buddha and incorporated into the Veda interpretation.
What is nirvana? I'm asking, what is nirvana?
Nirvana is there is no self. There is no self. There is only one colorless, waterless, indescribable endpoint, which is all pervading.
Okay. So when do you achieve this according to them?
According to them, there is no self in action. And everything is interconnected. You are that. Tattvamasi is the end there also.
Do they say Tattvamasi?
Now, they don't say that categorically, but
So there is a
what they
difference
say,
between Advaita Vedanta and Buddhism. Buddhism, or at least the way it is
but
right
the end
now,
point seems
the
to be
end
the
point,
same to me.
no, they are not the same. The shunyata that you are talking about, they talk about a state of blankness, of total blankness, where what you said, colorless, odorless, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that state of blankness, they say you reach in deep meditation, and they
But
say
how
this is
would you
nirvana
describe Brahman, for
and
example? Brahman, you
shunyata.
are saying, how would you describe Brahman in Vedanta?
This is where I am telling. They tell that that state of blankness is nirvana or moksha. We tell that the one who observes that state of blankness is Brahman. And that is the difference. They don't accept Brahman because they say state of blankness, end of story. We say, who is the one observing that blankness? And there is more to the story. And you are that. And that is the difference between Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta. Okay, this is very important to remember. Blankness is not Brahman. The one who observes the blankness. How do you know there is blankness? That is Brahman.
What we call Sakshi, what we call the witness of Sakshi.
Sakshi, the witness, yes.
Yeah, is that right?
Mehtaji, I want this sentence is Gnana eva Kaivalyam, no? Not Kaushalyam.
Jnana Deva Kaivalyam.
Okay.
Kaivalyam, not
And it is,
Kaushalya.
yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So when it comes to Buddhism and other schools, especially, I would say stay away from it for a while because it can get confusing. Because unless you have a firm foundation, it is very difficult to digest ideas from other schools also. And when it comes to Buddhism, especially, remember that they are Nastikas. They do not accept the Vedas. And so that is why we do not regard what they say. We do not take what they say. But Buddhism as a school is very great for developing Chitta Shuddhi. Up to Chitta Shuddhi, excellent. But when it comes to Atma Jnanam, you have to come back to Upanishads.
Mehtaji,
Yeah.
in the Nayar Dham ashram,
Yeah.
have the Vishnu, the Narayana hall, and in the hall they have paints of all the avatars of Lord
Yeah.
Vishnu, and Lord Buddha is painted there. So I'm wondering,
Many people don't accept Buddha as one of the avatars.
yeah, why in the Shivananda tradition
They don't accept Buddha. They
Yeah.
replace it with Shankaracharya or somebody else. They might replace the avatars. Anyway, avatars is those are all just the packaging story part of it. We don't
right.
worry so much about it. It's not very relevant to what we are discussing.
Netaji, I have one question.
Yeah.
In this very verse, when we have Guru Vedanta Vakya Dishu, the Adishu is for plural.
Yeah, plural. It's just a grammar part. Yeah.
Yeah. So what is that plural? What is the Adi part from that Guru Vedanta Vakya? Adi, what is involved in that?
Guru Vedanta Vakya. I have to check, but as far as what I know, it is just the grammar formation of the sentence. There's no Adi as such. Nobody else has really spoken on it or elaborated it. So probably it is just grammar and not an actual Adi.
Okay, thank you.
Mehtaji, namaskar, Amit this side.
Sorry?
Mehtaji, namaskar, Amit this side. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Ma'am, just wanted to ask one thing or request one thing, that we have our classes on Saturday and it's very insightful and knowledgeable. But for the remaining 6 days, sort of we become, out of touch. So if you can give us some homework or assignment or something so that at least for 10 minutes in a day, we can contemplate and we can stay in touch. Just a request that can be done.
So the 6 days for you to be doing mananam. You're supposed to be thinking on what has been discussed and contemplating more on that, and trying to also go through the recordings again and again, because the more you listen, the more deeper it goes inside. Other than this, we also have a lot of other classes being offered by the other teachers. We have chanting classes, Bhagavad Gita classes, many other sessions are going on. So I think it is sufficient. I don't think more homework is required. And I think you can make notes. If you really want to do something, then you take out the recordings and start making notes, start coming up with questions, start doing more mananam. And if you have questions, you can put it on the group. We can have a discussion. And this is how you deepen the understanding. So instead of me asking you questions for assignment, you ask me questions. Let that be your assignment.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, we'll stop now, and I'll see you next week. We'll end with the prayers. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namah. Harihi Om. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Medhaji.
Hari Om. Thank you.
Thank you, Medhaji.
Bye.